Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Trials at Home webinar on RADIAL, the project proof of concept study that is ready to start recruitment. My name is Petra, and I'll be your host today. If you have any questions during the webinar, please let us know by using the Q&A button in Zoom. We have foreseen time at the end to answer all of your questions. Before we dive into RADIAL, just a quick reminder on what is Trials at Home. Trials at Home is an IMI-funded research project coordinated jointly by the University Medical Center Utrecht and Sanofi. The Trials at Home consortium includes patient representatives, SMEs, academic institutions, and industry partners. The consortium explores the concept of decentralized clinical trials, also known as DCTs, which seek to move most, if not all, clinical trial activities from the doctor's office to the patient's home or immediate surroundings. According to our work plan, we're performing an inventory and analysis of existing and new techniques to use in DCTs. All of this so we could design and conduct a pan-European proof of concept study, RADIAL, which is now ready to start recruitment. If you'd like to know more about the project or DCTs, please visit trialsathome.com, where you can find some explanatory videos. What are we covering today? Today, we'll go first on the why and how of RADIAL, followed by an overview on how the study was co-created, and to end with a focus on all the decentralized elements in RADIAL and all the technology involved. And with this, I happily give the word to Mira Zuidgeest, who will cover the first agenda point, the why and how of RADIAL.
Thank you, Petra. So yes, welcome everyone to our webinar. I'm the academic co-lead for Trials at Home and the PI of RADIAL, and we're very happy to be able to provide you with an update today on this study. As Petra already introduced, we're covering the topic of decentralization of clinical trials. And decentralization of clinical trials is happening as we speak. As we all know, COVID really was a major catalyst for this. But in the meantime, there are also still quite some questions regarding both the potential benefits of these decentralized approaches and some concerns regarding, for example, data quality. And that is really why we are performing this proof of concept study, where we do a head-to-head comparison between a fully decentralized clinical trial arm, a hybrid trial arm, and a conventional clinical trial arm. So what are our objectives for this study? What I will do is I'll talk you through very quickly what does RADIAL look like before the others go into the nitty-gritty detail of how we came to this approach and how we're actually going to execute it in practice. So we have two primary study objectives for this proof of concept study. The one is to explore those potential benefits of decentralized approaches, which include, for example, recruitment of participants, retention, a possible increase in diversity, and very importantly, also site and patient satisfaction with these operational approaches, and last but not least, costs. And our other primary study objective is really to evaluate that acceptability of decentralized clinical trial approaches. In other words, can we responsibly move towards decentralized clinical trial approaches? So that really talks to the concerns that people may have regarding decentralization. Next slide, please. So how are we going to do this? And these slides may be familiar to some of you, but new to others, so I'll go through them quickly. So we're setting up this pan-European parallel group open label multi-center study. And in the picture, you can see which are the 6 participating countries in Europe. The participants of the study are people with type 2 diabetes, which have a suboptimal HbA1c level, and they will switch from one long-acting insulin to the other. As such, it's a phase 4 study because the use will remain within the label. The study is composed of 2 parts with 3 different arms. And part A is fully site-based, or it starts site-based as recruitment, and part B is really fully decentralized. And in the next slide, you can see what that looks like for each of the arms regarding visit schedule. So what you can see on the top, the light blue part, that's part A. Their participants are recruited site-based, so they come to site for screening, then they're randomized at site, and after that, they can either be in the conventional or the hybrid arm. In the conventional arm, which is the top one, they are followed up through site visits and phone calls. And in the hybrid arm, they are followed up through a home nurse visit in the middle, a site visit again at the end, and in between are reporting time points. And Bart will go into those in a bit more detail later on in this webinar. So the conventional arm, of course, important to mention, is a state-of-the-art conventional arm. We do, for example, use e-diaries here because that's already common practice in clinical trials. So we're not trying to go back in time. The hybrid arm moves to decentralized from the point of randomization until the last visit, which is at site again. And then we have part B, which I think where a lot of the innovation is, and that's a fully decentralized clinical trial arm where participants are recruited online. They have online telehealth contacts with the study team to assess eligibility and start of the study. They are only followed up online. They never actually go to a study center. They report in an app through digital technologies. Again, Bart will tell you more about that later on. And they have the same reporting time points as are there in the hybrid arm. So what is important to get clear, RADIAL is not a very typical clinical trial. It's really proof of concept on these operational approaches. So our objectives are mainly methodological, which means that the KPIs to look at quality of these decentralized approaches are our main outcomes in this study. Second important point to mention is that we submitted this study as a low intervention phase 4 trial. As I already mentioned, the IMP is used within the market authorization label, and there's minimal extra burden to the participants. And then there's population is familiar with insulin. That's also quite important because in part B, these participants never come to site. They switch from one insulin to the other, which they normally in clinical practice can also do at home. And as such, the safety features of this trial allow for a fully decentralized arm. As I mentioned already, key performance indicators are the main outcomes. That's because we want to test these operational models. And simply, if we want to move to DCT approaches, they need to meet the same key performance indicators as conventional trial approaches, because we also want to be able to generate valid and appropriate data from decentralized trials, because we need to be able to draw appropriate conclusions from these studies. So we identified through a Delphi study with experts KPIs which really reflect the scientific and operational quality of clinical trials surrounding these two main study objectives that I mentioned before. Going to those study objectives, let's have a look at the first one again. So in the next slide, you can see indeed, thanks, that this was a study objective around potential benefits of decentralized clinical trial approaches. And the KPIs that are attached to this are in the figure. We're going to look at enrollment rates. Is enrollment different for the different arms or for the different parts, I have to say. We can compare between part A and B here. We're going to look at retention rate in the different arms. We're going to look at study costs across the arms. Diversity, there's a lot of discussion there, where something that, because people can participate without having to come to site, we could increase diversity. But then, of course, you need a certain tech savviness if there's a lot of technology being used. So you might lose other people along the way. So we're really also going to dive into which types of people actually participate in the different parts. And then, as I already mentioned, site satisfaction, that's still in the previous slides, and participant satisfaction are very important. They're key players when we talk about clinical trials. So we need to know how they deal with these approaches, what they like, what they don't like. So there will be questionnaires to participants and to site personnel throughout the study at different time points to gain insights into that. And then for the other study objective, there's different KPIs, and we also look at them a bit differently. So this is about that mentioned acceptability of decentralized clinical trial approaches. And here we're not going to compare across arms. Normally in a study, you also have a certain level of data missingness, and you need to determine whether that's acceptable to be able to still draw meaningful conclusions. So here for these KPIs, we're going to do the same. Is the time of an AE SAE from occurrence to collection, is that acceptable in a certain arm? Is a treatment adherence acceptable? Missing data, query rate. But then, of course, the question is, what do we mean by acceptable? What is acceptable? So what we are doing is setting up a Delphi expert panel with various stakeholders in the field, external from the Trials at Home Consortium, to decide for this trial what would be an acceptable level of, for example, missing data, that you would still trust the data and work with the data. And those acceptability levels, those acceptability thresholds, we will be using to look at these KPIs. That's it for the theoretical part of this study. And with that, I want to give the floor to Sabine to talk about the co-creation of RADIAL. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira. So I'm going to introduce the co-creation process that took place within Trials at Home with people living with diabetes. So I'm from the International Diabetes Federation in Europe, which represents people living with diabetes and healthcare professionals from 73 national diabetes associations across 46 countries in Europe. And one of our priority objectives is to make sure that people's voice is heard, very much aligned with the motto of the diabetes community, and nothing about us without us. And one of the areas where we feel there is a strong need to improve and elevate the voice of people living with diabetes is very much in research. So it is our belief, and I think that it's increasingly being recognized, and also, although not always implemented or not always implemented in full, that people with lived experience of their conditions are experts and need to be engaged in the process because they know what ultimately will fulfill their needs. So they need to be there when things are being developed. So as such, people with lived experience should be engaged from the beginning of the research process through to the reimbursement decisions and post-marketing assessments and the dissemination of results. And we know that if that process is being done well, there will be an improvement in health outcomes and in the quality of life. There will be an increase in therapeutic options, and there will be faster and more cost-effective drug development and approval. So in terms of Trials at Home, engaging with people living with diabetes from the beginning of the process. Next slide, Petra, please. In effect, as soon as diabetes was chosen as the therapeutic indication, is the model that was followed for this project. And to structure this engagement, we first set up a patient expert panel. It's a group of 7 volunteers, representative of the diabetes community from various backgrounds, socioeconomic conditions, age, genders, country, etc. Plus 1 representative of IDF Europe, also living with diabetes, that provides a different type of perspective. And the idea here is that, next slide, please, is that the patient expert panel provides advice, insights, and inputs into all of the work packages of the project through ongoing as well as specific projects and initiatives. And that ensures that the experiences, needs, and perspectives of people living with diabetes are reflected at all stages of the project. So next slide, please. So the way that this engagement worked is that PEP members were fully embedded in groups of 2 as part of 4 of the work packages, work package 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the reason that they were embedded in groups of 2 was to reduce the burden. But within each one of these work packages, they would attend all of the regular meetings, as well as specific initiatives and project meetings. And they would also participate in all of the annual and semi-annual meetings. And the reason for this broad participation is that it enabled them not just to engage with the process, but in effect to be able to influence and decide what mattered to them and where they wanted to be able to contribute and what should be looked at. And that's a very important point as part of this project, because it's about going further than just getting a patient in to vet that the process is right. It's about empowering people with diabetes, recognizing that they're, and that works for other conditions as well, recognizing that they're experts and that they should be in the driving seat in the process and should be considered an equal partner as part of a research project. So, so in terms of the way that it worked is the group decided how it wanted and how it would be more effective to work with the other consortium members. So for some projects, like for example, the selection of tech vendors, 3 members of the PEP sat on some of the meetings and interviews and shared their views and insights. For the protocol development, all of the group actually provided input and feedback and reviewed the material. So the same was true of the data feedback to patient when this was being discussed. And the user testing of the insulin pen and the smart cap was done by just 2 of the PEP members. So the consultation format changed, and also the PEP could decide that more data or more research was needed. And in that case, the PEP could say, well, actually what would work is to have a surveys with a broader group of people. And in that case, they would not participate directly, but they would review the material that was shared with the external group. So in effect, it is a very committed and very heavy participation. And therefore, the conditions to support that engagement need to be put in place. But if I can summarize, I can say that Trials at Home is a very good example of the way that you can really integrate and involve people with lived condition. And I hope that it will contribute to a better outcome. Megan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sabine. So, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Obviously in terms of co-creation, engaging with our clinical trial participants is a powerful way to empower them and for us to better understand their needs. But we all know that we can't recruit into a clinical trial without having oversight from an investigator or indeed a number of the other stakeholders. So we need to have a study that meets the regulatory requirements to add value. We need to have a study that meets the demands from an ethical perspective. So it was important that we also had a plan to engage broadly with and extensively with all our stakeholders in the design phase. And what you can see on the screen here is a map of some of those key engagements. We had 2 scientific engagements to try and secure some input in terms of science and methodology. We started with the EMA's Innovation Task Force, which we initiated an early dialogue with them. And then you can also see that we followed that up with a BFARM scientific advice meeting, which gave us very powerful insights into some of the areas that they were focusing on. And from those meetings and that plan, we drew out some key areas, and that prompted us to have some focus groups and interviews. So we ran a mock ethics review, and we also had a separate project within Trials at Home to conduct some interviews with some regulators to better understand their perspective and what we were trying to deliver. And in summary, on the next slide, you will see some of the key areas that came out from the regulatory considerations for DCTs. So there was lots of discussion around onboarding, training and consent and compliance, given the fact that it's so divergent across the EU environment. And that diversion has been something that has been a continual challenge for us, even though we're only operating in 6 countries across the European region. We're having to navigate some local regulations that are not always aligned with the clinical trial regulation, and we're also gaining some rich learning from the consortium, which we're hopeful we'll be able to implement some simplifications, or influence rather some simplifications as we move through industrialization of clinical trial regulation, and also the output of the EU ACT roadmap, which some of our members are sitting at the table of. But the other areas, the investigator's responsibility per GCP, in ensuring we had adequate oversight, safety and efficacy, as you would expect in terms of adverse event reporting, and the data integrity, which Mira also mentioned at the beginning, have all been areas that were highlighted. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with them here, because I know Bart's going to cover a lot in more detail in his section of the presentation. It will give you a good feel of some of the mitigations that we've put in place to answer some of these questions. But suffice to say that our co-creation journey culminated in a final protocol in March 2022. As Mira already stated, it was submitted as a low intervention study with CETUS, and all countries were approved by the end of November 22, and that brings us to this point where we are on the cusp of recruitment. But I'll hand over to Bart to give you a little bit more detail on how we've accommodated some of these considerations in the study design.
Yes, thank you, Megan. So then it leaves me to talk indeed a little bit about the decentralized elements and the technologies that we have implemented in the RADIAL trial. So these are an overview of the decentralized elements that we will be using in the arms in RADIAL. So for example, if you see in the left top corner, we'll be using e-consenting and e-identification and e-signature to eventually sign the informed consent form. So participants actually can do this all from our app and don't have to come to site. Also available is the telemedicine, which means that there will be face-to-face interactions with, for example, the site, which can replace visits. But in this case, the participants, they don't have to travel to the site for this visit, but everything will be done via a screen, as we are doing now. We will also have an online social media campaign, online recruitment and pre-screening. And actually, because this wherever a participant lives in a country doesn't really matter for being part of the decentralized arm. Therefore, we will do this online nationwide campaign because they can actually join from everywhere. We will also be using home nurse visits. So in this case, actually, we will bring the site or an extension from the site physically closer to the participant, where the home nurse visits the participant in the participant's house and execute some of the study tasks here. Also, we'll be implementing remote monitoring and IMP adherence. This means that the drug that is studied in this trial, the dosing and timing of the intake of the drug can be monitored by the investigators or by the doctors from their office. This means again that the participant doesn't have to come to the site, for example, to show or to talk about how the intake of the drug is going. Also, we will use a study app for reporting of medical events, SAEs, AEs, ePros. Actually, there's also change in medication. Another decentralized element that we're using is the direct-to-patient shipment of the IMP. And as you can see, this is actually not such a technological advancement. It's more an operational advancement, but still, it's a decentralized method that is actually really needed for if you want to do a completely decentralized trial. And in this case, Again, the participant doesn't have to come to the site or to the pharmacy to pick up the drug, but the drug is being shipped directly to the participant's home, where then the participant can actually take the drug from the courier service. And we also be using at-home sample collection, which is either done by the home nurse when the home nurse visits the patient, or it has to be done by the patient themselves, where you do a small finger prick in their finger and they collect a little bit of blood that then they have to ship to the central lab directly. You can see that in this case, not all elements are implemented in every arm. So we have elements that are specifically for part B, for the decentralized arm, and we have elements specifically for the hybrid arm. And some elements we have actually in both arms. So there are innovations in both, not only in the decentralized arm, but also the hybrid arm. And you think, and actually all these elements, they actually bring quite a bit more complexity through a study and setting up a study. So here, we're not going to go into this picture completely, but here you see we've made a sort of a visualization of the flow of data and also which systems are connected to each other in the study. And here you see an overview of part A, so the conventional arm, and this is an overview of part B. So again, we're not going to go into this picture in this picture in detail, but what you can see is that there's many more services directly or indirectly in contact with the participant, and there's much more flow of data between systems that you might want or might not want to integrate also these systems. So why would you actually make something then so much more complex? Well, I think then we have to talk a little bit about the investigator oversight in a trial, and specifically in a decentralized trial. So first of all, if you think about a conventional trial, so a trial that's mainly executed at site, then the participant is most of the time remote, because the participant is most of the time not actually at the research site. But you can imagine that the engagement is quite high with the participant when he's at the research site, because there's a face-to-face interaction, physical interaction. But then when the participant home, there's actually not so much engagement. Maybe when there's phone calls, there's a bit more engagement. But in the decentralized, what we try to accomplish with implementing all these extra decentralized features is that actually also in the decentralized arm, there's a continuous oversight of the participant, also when the participant is not at visit and just executing the study by themselves at home. So how do you then maintain oversight when the participants are remote? I've already alluded on a few of the elements that we use. For example, we have the continuous reporting. So whenever a participant encounters, for example, a medical event, or they have a change in medication, we ask the participant to report this immediately in an app. And the advantage of this is that you probably collect the data closer than to when it's actually happening, and therefore if you need to review that data, you can do that much more faster. But that is also something that we will evaluate in RADIAL if that's actually the case. We also have the remote data collection and the remote monitoring. This means actually that the drug intake by the participant is collected remotely. So the timing and the dosing of the event of the drug is collected and then automatically sent to a system where the investigator can log into and monitor the drug intake. And of course, there's also still phone calls, but also again these telemedicine moments where if there is something where contact is needed, of course you can always reach out to the participant. So here I made it just to make it a little bit more visual. You see here, for example, this is the continuous reporting. So we have a RADIAL app where participants can record their data. Here you see a participant that is recording a medical event. So for example, maybe the participant experiences a headache or a migraine, they can fill it in here, and then they can submit this form, and then the site can review that information that is sent to them. Here you see actually our portal for investigators for the monitoring of the IMP adherence. Every line here is an overview of is a participant, and you can see when it's the last intake of the drug, what is the overall adherence status. So is the participant actually doing what we are asking from them according to the protocol? And even if you click on a participant, you can even see, for example, on day-to-day basis, how much did this participant take of the drug? When did the participant take it? What time? Or even when was it missed? When was this dosing missed, and why was that? That can you then discuss with the patient. Also the telemedicine, what we talked about, this is all integrated also in the app, but also it's available on a laptop or a desktop computer, because maybe video calling on an app on your phone is maybe not the most desirable for some people. So that's why it's also available on the portal. But you can see here, the participant is clicking here through the app. Just going back a little bit, it went a little bit fast. So if you're clicking on meetings, the participants can see all upcoming meetings. And then when you click on this meeting, there's a secure link. And then within moments, actually they're talking talking face-to-face via screen with the investigator. It also works the other way around. So when the participant wants to engage with the investigator or the site, they can request a callback. So this means that they select a time slot, they indicate what they would like to be contacted on, and then the site is notified for that. So actually, when you think of this, you think, okay, so this remote trial site, or also hybrid sometimes, is then a 24/7 trial site. Well, that is actually not what we expect from our sites in Radial, because we do not expect that the site is following up real time all the information that comes into the system. But there we set up a risk-based approach. That means that, for example, the remote monitoring of the IMP, we don't expect the investigator to log into this portal every day and check all the patients every day. Of course, if he or she wants to, of course, that's allowed. But what we do to help is we give weekly digest of the dosing data. We send an email. These are your patients. What is the adherence status? And we do this on based of sort of algorithms that find patterns in the data. And then the investigator can decide, okay, this patient, actually, I want to investigate a little bit further, can log into the system or even contact the patient. We have automated alerts and notifications. Some events that are reported, they might not require immediate follow-up by the investigator, but others might require immediate follow-up. For example, if the participant tells us, "Hey, I have this, I've had this medical event, and I went to a healthcare professional to be consulted." And then in this case, maybe this event could be actually more serious, and then we've asked the site, we notify the site, and they should act a little bit more promptly on these things. And we have the reporting time points, which Mira already included. So again, at these reporting time points, we do expect the investigator to look at all the data that has been collected. Again, the participant collects. Here we see again where those reporting time points are. What is good to remember is that those reporting time points are not actually reporting time points for participants, because we want the participants to record everything as it occurs. So when they change their medication, actually directly let us know via the app. When there's a medical event, directly let us know via the app. When there's a hypoglycemic event. However, for the investigator, this is a reporting time point, and we ask the investigator to look at the data at this time. But the investigator needs to know then if the data is actually complete. So what we do is we remind the participant that we ask them if all their data has been collected. So if you look at the left picture, I made a small, I made an enlargement in a previous. Anyway, I will read it out for you because the text is pretty small. You've been using 2JO for 1 week. That's the IMP that we're using in this study. Did you report all your change in medication, medical events, and hypos if they occurred? Please check this by confirm. So then when the participant says, actually, I've collected all my data, they confirm this in a form. That's the second picture. And then in the third, there's a message to the site. We let the site know that this participant at this reporting time point has said that they have collected all their data. Can you please review the data? And I've also talked about these notifications to site when something is probably more serious. So in the left picture, when a participant indicates that, for example, an event was significant enough to seek advice from a healthcare professional, this is notified to the site. And we ask them to actually review that then immediately and act upon that if needed it's in their discretion. So those were a few examples of the oversight, the centralized elements used in RADIAL and how we've implemented that. So a little bit short update on the current status. Indeed, as the title of this webinar already spoils maybe a little bit, we are indeed ready for recruitment. Where are we now? The systems are in place, and we will put the systems live soon. All the materials are being shipped to our central depot right now, and the SIVs are either already conducted or being conducted in the countries. First country to go live is the UK, and then the second countries will be in the second wave in half of July, and then another wave probably beginning of August. And this all depends also on implementing and checking all the translations of the systems, because you can see there's a lot of messaging and messages sent to participants, and that needs to be all checked securely. That brings us to the end of this seminar, at least the part where we do the talking. But we are open to receive your questions.
Yes, thank you, Bart. I see several questions in the Q&A. So, sorry. I think this one is for you, Bart. What operational aspects did your team give extra attention to for this DCT compared to a traditional trial?
So what I think, maybe it's a bit of a big and vague term, but I would say logistics. So having a central depot in a country where you ship all your directly to the patient or directly to the sites, that indeed is pay more attention to than a traditional trial. Also, of course, the flow of information and the flow of data. This is it's much more complex, as I showed also in the picture. And here we also have put a lot of effort in where does the data go? How is this safe? How is this ensured to safety? And also, how do you explain this to a participant? So that definitely went more work into than a traditional trial.
And linked to that, Cristiano is actually asking whether the app that we will be using is adapted in language for each country.
Yeah. So all the app will be, if you are a participant in Spain, it will be in Spanish. It will be sent to a Spanish telemedicine app as well, so that all everything is in your local language.
Thank you. And I think this one, I don't know who wants to take it, so please jump on it. Do you expect any difficulty if some patient's primary physician objects to the change in medication? Is this one for you, Mira?
Or maybe Sabine could comment on primary clinicians.
This is going to be a discussion between the person living with diabetes and their physician, of course, and there are some benefits in participating in this type of trial. So it will be, I think, a discussion, and there is no one answer. Some physicians might object. It will depend on the participant, but we hope that if a participant want to get involved in the study, then the benefits of the study will also be clear to everybody.
Thank you, Sabine. And then we have two questions which are very similar, one from Andrea Zobel, one from Joanne Waters. Both are on how is data being pushed from the smart cap for tracking IMP and adherence, and the other one is the question from Andrea was whether we are using a pen or is it data transfer? Is it data transfer immediate? So I think Bart, this one is for you.
Yeah, if you could maybe go to the slide that could be illustrative, I think.
Is it this one?
No, it's in the beginning of my presentation. If it's too much switching, it's
this one. So you tell me stop.
Yeah. So there is a smart cap that can be attached to an insulin pen, and the smart cap can collect dosing and timing data by itself. Can collect up to, I think, 70 dosings, but whenever it connects via Bluetooth with the phone of the participant, and there the data is transferred to the MEMS, to an app. It's called, in this case, the MEMS app. And whenever the data is then transferred to the MEMS app, it's also transferred to the MEMS portal and then also back into our EDC. So this means that if you are, I know you can use the cap. I see that my background is blocking it. You can use the cap just by itself, but you would need to connect it to your phone at least on a periodic basis for the data to be transferred to the app and then to the system. When this doesn't happen, when the transfer doesn't happen, this is also alerted to the investigator. So then you can also contact the investigator, the participants. Why are you not transferring data, or are you not taking your IMP?
Thank you, Bart.
Yeah.
Megan, this one is for you. Were there any regulatory challenges with getting this design approved? Question from Katie.
There were regulatory challenges. We did have an RFI coming back from CETUS. We were able to fit with the timelines and respond to most of them, and I'm having a bit of a blank now about the questions that they asked us. I don't know whether Mira can probably have them more in her fingertips than I did have. We had questions around the investigator oversight for sure that we had to address, and we had questions around the dispense of the IMP, but there was nothing in the request from the regulators that wasn't something that we wouldn't typically have seen in a normal clinical trial. There was nothing exceptional that threw us in the regulatory responses.
Thanks, Megan.
Maybe I can indeed add to that. So indeed, there was a lot of oversight, but there also were quite some discussions on the design of our specific proof of concept study. And I see there's a question on that in the chat about randomization. So maybe I can tackle that while answering this question partly as well. Because indeed we had some discussion, and I see here the question whether we randomize between all three of the arms, which is not the case. So we have a part A where there's site-based recruitment, and there we randomize between the conventional and the hybrid arm. And then there's part B, which is fully decentralized, which is not randomized. And we had some discussions about that, and we are doing that because we are testing the operational models, and in future trials we would use only one operational model, so not all three of them next to each other. And if we want to answer, for example, the KPI on diversity, we need to, the participants in a fully decentralized arm, as Bart stipulated, need to be able to join from anywhere in the country. if they could be randomized to site-based, that would not be the case. So we made a very, very concrete choice to not randomize there, which in practice means that these populations can be different between part A and part B, which would also be the case if we would move from the convention model to the decentralized model. And that also talks to maybe the second point of that question, whether digital capability exclusion was considered in the eligibility criteria. Yes, definitely. Again, quite some discussions. That was also a topic with the regulators. To what extent don't you lose those participants that don't have that digital capability for a decentralized arm? That's one of the questions we hope and try to answer. We didn't include it as a specific eligibility criteria on its own, because we don't want to make assumptions. Oh, this is an elderly patient of this age, so we assume that person does not have the digital capability to deal with this. We do have the eligibility criteria if they can't comply with the study procedures, and during screening they already have to, in the decentralized arm, for example, install the app and start some of the digital processes, so the investigator can see whether a participant can do that. If not, then the participant cannot continue, and we specifically ask the investigator to state the reason so that we get more insights into which participants may not be able to join due to digital incapabilities in that sense.
Thanks, Mira. And I think this one is for you as well. We have a few questions coming in as well on DTP-IMP. One part is whether the process is similar across the different countries, and what do we use? Do we use a depot, central pharmacy, or another location?
Yes, so I must say this was a very important topic that still took quite some time after CETA's approval, because then we, of course, also had to look into the local legislations of the countries where we do the trial. And as such, we had to set up DTP-IMP differently in the different countries. So in the UK and in Denmark, we have direct DTP from a central pharmacy in Germany. So the central pharmacy is located in Germany, and they ship directly to the participants in the UK and in Denmark. In Spain and in Poland, we have a pharmacy in the country for the DTP-IMP. In Germany, that's naturally the case because the central pharmacy already is in Germany. So we had to really adapt these approaches to the different countries and what was and was not allowed in those countries. I don't know whether the others want to add to this, because it has been a big topic and Bart has been heavily involved as well.
I think it captures it's correct, yeah.
Bart, don't run away, because people are asking questions about technologies as well. Are we using one technology source or multiple technology sources? And did we do all the joining together of technologies ourselves or not?
Yeah, so it's multiple. There is integrations between different, for example, providers, such as the telemedicine tool, the MEMS, for example, for the remote monitoring. We have for the consenting, well, the e-signature, the identification, we have another vendor, and those are all integrated in our central data capture platform, which is a consortium partner. So in that sense, we did it all ourselves. But of course, what we see is that the vendors, they also have to talk to each other a lot, because as a sponsor, how those systems need to interact is the vendors also need to really interact between themselves to integrate the systems correctly.
Okay, and then a question from Dominique Hamerlink. Compared to a traditional trial, a decentralized trial is much richer in data. A lot more data is gathered. How do you compare between the traditional and decentralized trials in the different aspects of data quality, missed data, adherence, etc.?
I can first go with that.
Yes.
So indeed, in a decentralized trial, there may be much more data, but it doesn't have to be. It still depends on how you collect your data. So for our specific trial, on certain data points, we have about the same data. For example, the participant satisfaction questionnaire, that's collected in the same way in all the same arms. Whereas for the where we use the CAP in the one arm and manual entrance in the other, there may indeed be differences in richness of data. So specifically for the missing data, we agreed to look at a couple of specific data points to see whether there's a difference in missingness, which includes, for example, HbA1c and a participant satisfaction questionnaire. And there we deal with that partly through the fact that we have the same number of data points there. And we said these are key data for this study. And I think the other question, because there was two questions in one, right? I'm trying to find, it's already in the research.
Yeah, it's already in the published ones. So how do you compare between the traditional and decentralized trials in the different aspects of data quality, missed data, and adherence?
Yeah, so and the other part indeed is that for each and every trial, of course, you need to determine is, for example, the level of missing data, is the level of adherence, is that acceptable for this trial, giving this research question, giving this, that's being done in any clinical trial where we need to determine how well we trust the conclusions that come from that and the data that come from that. So as I mentioned very quickly, but I know there was a lot of information, is that that level of acceptability of for example, missing data also depends on, is it a critical data point or not? How many data points do you have? So we're going to set up a Delphi panel with experts in these fields to determine what is an acceptable level of missing data, of adherence for this specific trial with this specific question.
Thank you, Mira. And I have a question for, yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
Just to add a comment, because I think it's important as well that we don't look at data and data flow in isolation in terms of computation or systems. That in actual fact, one of the key things in this study is the interaction and play of the participant with the investigator and the level of contact that they're getting. And we should be able in this study, through the satisfaction criteria coming from the site as well as the patient, to actually see, is there any correlation between missing data and the amount of contact that the participant is having with the clinician. It'll be quite interesting to see how much of our data collection in a traditional study is actually driven by the site, and how much of that we potentially might lose as opposed to having more data in the remote arm. So it's a question to be answered very much still.
Thank you for that, Megan. I have a question for Sabine regarding the PEP, because we all heard how involved they were. How did the PEP members perceive their collaboration and their input, and in all aspects, but for RADIAL specifically?
Well, I think that they very much approached the openness and the possibility that they had to really review all aspects of the design and to be heard. So I think for them it's been a very positive experience, and one that demonstrated that there is a difference between the theory and the reality of it. And I think that also, I think perhaps Bart can also talk to that point, but there were some experiences that the PEP shared that nobody had thought about, or that they did not believe that this was the way that a person living with diabetes would handle their diabetes. And without that contribution, I think that some of the things would have been missed. So from their viewpoint, we know that they felt that their contribution was useful.
Thank you, Sabine. And Mira, Paula has an additional question. She compliments us on the study methodology. Thank you, Paula. And she asked, was there a fourth option considered and dismissed, namely, where a potential participant was given a choice as to which arm they preferred?
Yes, and that has been discussed at length at the start of the study, that we preferably would want to look at both patient satisfaction, participant satisfaction with a certain operational model, but also participants' preferences for certain models. The problem is that you can't do both in one study. So in the end, what we decided to do is have the study as currently is, to also not influence, for example, our recruitment and retention KPIs as would be in a normal clinical trial, but also set up a separate study, which is a patient preference study, also with people living with type 2 diabetes, where it's in the shape of a so-called I want to use decentralized clinical trials because I use the term so often, but it's a discrete choice experiment where people are presented with two options for a clinical trial, so an operational model on how you can do that, and a third option not to participate. And through that, we'll gain much more knowledge on the drivers for deciding whether or not to participate in a trial with different levels of decentralization. So those two findings from this study on participant satisfaction and that on preferences should be complementary to each other.
Thank you. And I have one more for Bart. Hi, are the algorithms used in the weekly digest of doing data validated for a risk-based approach?
Yeah, so we created use cases, so imaginary data figures, data subjects that are imaginary collecting insulin data over a period of time to see if the algorithms, they give us the right tag, but we identified those tags. And again, this is just to aid the investigators. It's still at the discretion of the investigators. And we still have the reporting time points that they have to go in to look at the data themselves and shouldn't just trust on the algorithm. So they were validated, but there's also some investigator human eye still there.
Okay, thank you. I have another one for you, Bart. In the remote arm, the investigators do not have direct contact with participants. How will you ensure that all the participants have followed the necessary training and that they know what is expected of them?
Yeah, so I would like to argue a little bit on the direct contact because there is direct contact only just through telemedicine. So there's no physical contact. And therefore, we do have extra trainings for the decentralized arm that are offered through the app. Sites can monitor if these trainings were done, but it's still also at the responsibility of the investigator to train the participants, but then not at sites, but also at a telemedicine visit.
Thank you. And that leaves us with 2 more minutes. Does anybody from my very nice panelists have anything else to add before we close this webinar? No. Well, in that case, Mira, Sabine, Megan, Bart, thank you very much for this very interesting webinar. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it and learned a lot. To the participants, to people looking at us, the slides in the video will be available very soon on the project website, and you can find it all there. If you have any additional questions or suggestions, please reach out to us either through the project website or through our social media channels, and we will definitely get back to you. And with that, again, thank you very much. And I hope to see you soon in another webinar. Bye.
Bye.